on creating resilient cities, financing efficiency in the Colorado River Basin. My name is Mary Ann Dickinson. I have the pleasure of being moderator today for your webinar. I'm with the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and we've assembled a terrific cast of speakers to talk with you today about the financing issues concerning water efficiency, and in particular how they are impacting water conservation and efficiency programs in the Colorado River Basin. This is a webinar that is being jointly sponsored by the Water Efficiency Action Network for the Colorado River Basin states and the Alliance for Water Efficiency. Just a little bit of housekeeping detail about the webinar. It'll be 60 minutes in length. That's what our plan is for today. And we've built in about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. If you're hearing my voice, you know that the audio has been correctly assembled, but if you're only reading this, hopefully you will see that the audio can either be through your telephone or your computer microphone and speakers. You can choose either one. Both will work equally well. If you use your telephone, you have to enter the passcode, but if you're hearing my voice, you have already done that. Most importantly, we have muted the webinar phone line so that the background noises are minimized during the presentation. We are recording the webinar. We will be posting the webinar online in both organization websites. So we will be able to make the webinar available even for those who weren't able to join us in person today. But that doesn't mean because you're muted and the phone line is you know, not active and live, that doesn't mean we don't want you to participate and ask questions. So we have the dialog box of the webinar, which can be accessed in the upper right-hand corner of your screen by clicking the orange box with the white arrow. And that dialog box enables you to type in questions as you go along. You can type in at any time. Jeffrey Hughes, our webmaster, will be reading the questions that we have received more or less in the order that they come in, and we will go through all the questions before the webinar is done. We'll continue until every question is answered. You'll see at the bottom of the slide the two logos for the organizations sponsoring this. The Alliance for Water Efficiency, many of you know us because we do a fair number of webinars on a wide range of topics. We're a North American nonprofit devoted to the efficient and sustainable use of water, so we do a fair number of program and training work in this area. But I also want to give an opportunity to the folks from the Water Efficiency Action Network to talk about their work. And so I'd like to turn it over to Cindy Dybala, who will just talk a little bit about the mission of this particular organization and how this webinar today has come to be.
Well, hi, this is Cindy Dybala, and thanks to the panelists for agreeing to participate in this webinar, and thank you all for coming. So as you can see, the Water Efficiency Action Network is focused on the Colorado River Basin states, on local as well as state actions in the basin. And the overall focus is to collaborate in advancing the effectiveness of water use efficiency throughout the basin. As such, we have working groups. One of them is the Finance Committee, and the Finance Working Group is one of the co-sponsors of this webinar and had the idea to put it together. We use webinars pretty frequently as a tool to reach out to our members and to others. The group is a virtual network. It's largely voluntary, and it's a diverse membership. Anyone can join. Anyone with any interest in the basin. Membership is very cheap, and you can go to the website to get more information. And you're free to participate in any of our work groups. Climate change, finance, and research are the three that we have going right now. So, Mary Ann, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Cindy. So that's the background of how we came to you today. And what we'd like to do at this point is just describe to you what we're planning to do in this webinar. We will hear 3 different presentations, one from Ed Osan of the Natural Resources Defense Council about best management practice work that's going on in California. A second presentation by Jorge Figueroa and Rachel Brumbaugh representing a project that's underway with the Western Resource Advocates. And then I will finish up with a summary of the rates and revenue stability work that we are doing at the Alliance for Water Efficiency. So after those 3 presentations, then we will be opening it up for questions. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ed Osan from the Natural Resources Defense Council, who will talk to us about the conservation pricing issues that are currently being discussed in California.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Ann. You can go to the next slide. Conservation pricing has been recognized as a conservation and efficiency strategy for a long time. The current conditions have placed rate structures under a lot of stress, and the effectiveness for evaluating rate structures has been lacking largely in the public sector. Most water suppliers are public agencies and not subject to state rate regulation, and it's sometimes challenging to know for the lay person, whether they're a consumer or a local governing board member, to have a good sense of the effectiveness of the rate structure in promoting conservation. So this slide is just a brief infomercial about NRDC. We are a nonprofit environmental organization and have been around since 1970. Next slide. We've been engaged in pricing issues and rate structures for some time, both with regard to energy and energy efficiency, and also water and water efficiency. With regard to water rates, we really are trying to encourage rates that send a strong price signal for peak season outdoor water demand, while maintaining affordability of essential levels of indoor water use. And at this time, it's also important to underscore the value of integrating pricing strategy with drought preparedness. Next slide. Without getting too far into the inside baseball of the California Urban Water Conservation Council, suffice it to say that there are a range of best management practices that have been adopted by the Urban Conservation Council and been in place for 20 years or so. The council is a nonprofit organization itself, made up of most of the state's major water suppliers and most of the state's environmental organizations with an interest in water. And together they maintain a set and periodically revise a set of best management practices to promote water efficiency. For the last 7 or 8 years, there has been a best management practice, or BMP, on conservation rates, whose essential requirement called for utilities to maintain a 70-30 split between the revenues received by commodity or volumetric charges and the revenues received by fixed charges. That was deemed to be a basic threshold that would have the effect of preserving the responsiveness of the volumetric portion of the bill, and a larger fixed charge share of the bill. The concern is that it would basically devour the bill, and that consumers would not be getting a sufficient price response for their conservation efforts. In recent years, however, council members have found difficulty, the utility members have found difficulty implementing this, at least some of them, and the most recent numbers available indicated that about 40% of the council members were not meeting the 70-30 split in 2011 and 2012. And since the eligibility for state loans and grants is tied to implementing demand management measures, including these VMPs, this is a matter of growing concern for utilities. Next slide. The environmental participants in the council also have concerns about the current VMP. While the 70-30 split has some value, it's really not sufficient to ensure a strong conservation rate structure. It doesn't really provide specific encouragement of tiered rates and no assurance of a strong price signal. And we do find that some of the concerns that water suppliers have identified have some merit. Next slide. There's also a second part to this BMP that deals with rates for sanitary sewer service. It does call for conservation pricing of sanitary sewer service, but the language of the BMP is really not very specific regarding the responsibility of water suppliers to encourage the adoption of conservation rates by sanitary sewer service providers within their service area. So that was an issue that that drew the attention of the environmental groups and encouraged the prospects for negotiation. Next slide. So the resulting effort focusing on water rates here was to come up with an evaluation tool that would take into account a range of factors and not just have a single pass-fail criteria like the split between fixed cost and variable cost. What a drafting committee came up with is what you have here on the screen, and I know that it's somewhat hard to read the fine print. It'll be easier for you when you have a chance to download the presentations from today and take a look at it on your own screen in front of you. But the idea here is this is a points-based system, somewhat like the LEED green building rating system, where you gather points in different areas for a total score. So it's divided into three parts. The upper part has to do with rate structures in particular, and you'll see a differentiation of points provided for systems that have uniform rates for their customers, two-tiered or a seasonal rate for their customers, or three or more tiers, or an allocation-based design for their customers. And so those factors together form the top part of the matrix. The center part of it is really probably the most innovative part of the concept here. It's called the proportionality test, and it's intended to provide a way of assessing the strength of the price signal by basically looking at two levels of consumption and that would be typical for residential customers, and asking if two levels of consumption that are where one level is twice the level of consumption as the other, is the total bill of that second customer double, or is it somewhat less than double? If so, how much? And so it takes into account both the fixed charge portion of the bill and the variable charge portion of the bill, and comparing two typical levels of consumption that where one represents twice the other, looks at the ratio of the total bill and assigns points, the greater the points being to the right, where the rate is fully proportional, with even bonus points for going a bit higher. The third area of the matrix, which was of great interest to water suppliers, was an identification of a set of practices that were not specifically in the rate structure, but were designed to enhance the visibility or the efficacy of the price signal itself. Things like monthly billing, practices like AMI systems that can provide automated, not only automated meter readings, but automated notices to customers of high consumption, separate metering for large landscapes, clearer graphics on utility bills. These are all things that can contribute to a more effective conveyance, more effective and timely conveyance of the price signal. So together, this matrix together combines to 60 points altogether in the form that you see it there. Next slide. So the upshot here is that this is a forward-looking approach. It allows for a rate design and billing practices to be assessed even before they're put into practice. You could run a score based upon a potential rate structure. The implementation of the performance under the matrix is not directly impacted by things like the weather or the economy or some other exogenous cutbacks in customer usage. It is used to judge actions that the utility takes on its own initiative. And it does, I think, acknowledge the importance of a wider range of billing practices to help customers really understand the rate structure. And it really does encourage tiered rates. Next slide. As I mentioned, it's based on the total bill, and performance doesn't turn on a single factor. And it's driven by data that are largely publicly available, and all the calculations are quite simple. Next slide. This has not yet been adopted yet by the Urban Conservation Council. In fact, there is a board meeting later this week to consider a final range of outstanding issues. The concept of this approach, I think, has been fairly well received. Most of the outstanding issues really relate to how to bring this into the Council's framework of policy. How soon should it become part of the VMPs? When should the current options be phased out? And what exactly would constitute a passing grade for the matrix, either initially over time. Next slide. So we would encourage people to download the narrative report about this proposal. It's available at cuwcc.org. You can try the matrix yourself. It's pretty simple to work with your own rate structure, either if you're a utility or even a consumer, could largely work off of published material and put together an evaluation score. You could try it out and see how utilities in your surrounding area are performing as well. And the Council would certainly like to hear from you if you have particular questions or suggestions. And with that, I think I'll wrap it up.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. We have on the screen now Ed's contact information if you have any further questions about it that you'd like to ask him directly, but hopefully you have questions already typed in into the webinar dialog box that we can be asking Ed a little bit later. So thank you for that presentation. At this point, we'd like to move to the Western Resource Advocates presentation, and Jorge, I'd like you to introduce Rachel.
Thank you, Marianne. My name is Jorge. I'm a water policy analyst with Western Resource Advocates, and I will be introducing Rachel Brombaug's presentation. Rachel works for McKinstry, which is one of the leading energy service companies in the West. She's a senior financial analyst. And McKinstry and Western Resource Advocates worked for most of this year on developing a market study on the potential to do achieve water and energy savings on public buildings exclusively through energy and water performance contracts in the Colorado River Basin states. And when we are talking about creating resilient cities and communities, I think that it's important for us to understand that the West and Western cities and communities will really be the ground zero for doing that, because we have the highest population growth centers in the nation, which at the same time also happen to be the driest cities and communities in the U.S. So water efficiency, and specifically funding water efficiency, will be one of the major strategies that we're going to be implementing in the future and in the short term, that we should be implementing to make our communities more resilient to climate and climate change, because there's a significant nexus and impact of greenhouse gases to our water supply. Bureau of Reclamation has projected our water supplies in the Colorado River Basin to be reduced by 10 to 20%. Just exclusively through greenhouse gases. It's also very important for our communities to be able to reduce their electric use and mitigate greenhouse gases in order for us to have a more reliable water supply. So the business model of performance contracts works through energy service companies that they offer quote-unquote performance contracts that guarantee water and energy savings to state and local governments. ESCOs, energy savings companies like McKinstry, guarantee savings will meet or exceed the annual payments needed to cover their project costs, and that if the savings don't materialize, they will pay the difference. And so in a nutshell, this study demonstrates that we can achieve, for example, more water savings than what reclamation projects that can be saved through tamarisk removal. We could also reduce unaccounted for water in the basin by about 480,000 acre-feet per year, while at the same time achieving $911 million in water and energy savings and up to $930 million in revenue for water utilities across the basin states just through performance contracts. And with that, I'm going to leave it to Rachel to present the study.
Thank you, Jorge. It's my pleasure to participate. You know, as a energy services and design build construction firm, McKinstry comes at water scarcity issues from a different perspective, not the policy and from a less technical perspective, but our motto, our company motto, is together building a thriving planet. And I think with collaboration from different groups, we can get there. The study that McKinstry and Western Resource Advocates worked on, as Jorge said, was to assess the potential savings through energy savings performance contracts for government-owned buildings and facilities in the basin states, Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. So it's a high-level study. The goals of the study were to quantify the electrical, natural gas, and water savings in these government-owned facilities, to review the legislative and programmatic environment for each state, to highlight characteristics that support robust ESPC deployment, and to review funding mechanisms for ESPC. And what we found is there is significant opportunity for water savings in the built environment through water and energy performance contracting. Next slide, please, Marian. Let me briefly go over energy savings performance contracts. It's nothing new. They've been around for many years, and we've implemented hundreds of them and saved hundreds of millions of dollars for our clients. ESPC is an energy savings performance contract, and at a high level, it provides a procurement benefit and risk mitigation and risk transfer. So essentially, all states and the 7 Colorado River Basin states have enabling legislation that allows public agencies to select a service provider for energy efficiency work on a quality basis, not a low bid basis. So you can work with a service provider that meets your qualifications and not just on a low price. ESPC gives both private companies and public agencies a single point of accountability and guaranteed results. And private companies, if there's any listeners, can use ESPC. Obviously, you're not mandated to use by the public any public procurement mechanisms, but we do have several private customers also. It is historically focused on the built environment with recent growth in public sector infrastructure, notably water meters, water supply systems, wastewater, and other things like street lights for LEDs, etc. As Jorge noted, the savings must exceed the costs, including any interest costs that are used, that are accrued when one is financing the project. And it could be on an annual basis or over the term of the contract. And that protects the public agency and your constituents. The risk transfer really happens with the energy services company, the ESCO, who performs the work and guarantees the price and the utility savings. The GMAX price, the guaranteed maximum price, puts the performance risk on the service provider. So if the cost to install the equipment is above what the service provider guaranteed, that does not increase the...
Hello, Rachel?
And the guaranteed utility savings free up cash flow to service debt, and that's a key component of ESPC contracts. Next slide, please, and I'll show you a graph. Oh, it looks like this is a little squished on here, but let me explain what these are. On column 0, year 0, the green represents any kind of capital contribution from the customer, and that could be capital funds or grant and incentive funds. The black line at the top is your baseline utility cost if you did not install energy efficiency equipment. The blue line, the blue lines are the post-implementation utility cost, your savings from installing energy efficiency equipment. The dark black band is your debt, and the yellow is savings. And as you can see in this case, the customer has put in about $750,000 on a $3 million project. Is servicing the debt at about $300,000 per year for 10 years. And you can see that savings on this project accrue from year 1. There's approximately $75,000 of savings that accrue to the customer. And these grow as utility cost increases grow, which your savings grow. At the end of the term, you can see that without the debt payments, all the savings accrue directly to the customer. So this is a typical cash flow. This is a budget accretive cash flow. Sometimes we see budget neutral cash flows. So using this model, we looked at how we could implement that in the basin-wide study. So next slide, please. So our study was a high-level analysis of the electricity, natural gas, and water savings in 3 main areas of government-owned facilities: government-owned buildings, water supply systems, and wastewater treatment plants. We'll look at government-owned buildings in more detail and water supply systems in more detail. As you can see, there's an enormous potential for electricity and natural gas and water savings. And there's, as Jorge said, almost $1 billion worth of total savings potential. With conservative estimates, we estimate almost $911 million of total savings potential in the overall market comprised of these 3 buckets. If we look at an annual savings, potential annual savings, that is derived from assuming a 10% adoption rate. that 1 out of every 10 municipalities will enter into a performance contract to save energy and water. So next slide, please. We'll go into a little bit more detail on the electricity and natural gas savings in public buildings. What we looked at here was total electricity and natural gas usage for government buildings in the 7 basin states using Energy Information Administration information. And then we discounted that market size by 30% due to estimates on existing market penetration of approximately 30%. And that's data that we pulled from the U.S. Department of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, indicating that there is some existing penetration in the market. We then applied an average ESPC project savings number of 15% for that. And that number is a number that we in McKinstry are very comfortable with. We routinely see projects with that level of savings, sometimes less, sometimes more, but that's also a national study number that the Lawrence Berkeley Labs in a very comprehensive study poll that would be an average electricity and natural gas savings. So as you can see, it turns into approximately $670 million total market opportunity just in public buildings alone. As you can see, a much higher use of electricity than natural gas in building systems, particularly in the basin states due to the cooling need. We'll go to the next slide, please, and look at water savings in public buildings. So water demand was derived from the U.S. Geologic Survey's 2005 survey on for government uses, and for water rates, which probably other people on this call could speak to in far more detail. We used water rates from large metropolitan areas in each basin state as a proxy for water prices to come to a government market size for usage in government buildings, the same definition as we used for electricity and natural gas savings. We then applied an average savings at the low end of 7% and a high of 10%. And these are market rates that we've seen, and these result in, with 100% market adoption, total potential savings of anywhere from 58 to almost $84 million. And this really highlights the gap between electricity and natural gas reduction efforts and water saving efforts. You know, water conservation measures through ESPC have not received the same level of attention as other utility conservation measures, and we think with, which are estimated more at 15%, and with a more concerted effort, we think you could see these numbers for average savings go up to 15% and really impacting savings for government facilities and reducing the water consumption. Next slide, please. We then looked at water savings in public water systems, and this is both a savings component and a revenue component. Water meters, the accuracy of water meters typically it declines over time as they get old, and it can result in over and under billing. What we typically see is that aging meters do not read low flow volumes correctly, resulting in significant underbilling, which creates lost revenue unaccounted for water for the water system operator. And underbilling obviously can also occur from loss due to leakage, but ESPC is not really the best way to address improvement of that type of infrastructure, since ESPC relies on a cash flow guaranteed structure in there. So again, we used the same sources from before to come to a potential water meter size. We did discount the market by a significant amount just to account for existing market penetration and also for areas that are unmetered to really come to a good conservative effort. And so once we got to our potential market size, we put in a 10% increase of billable water. And that's a number that's right in the middle of the 5 to 15% rate that we've seen, and that we've also seen in McKinstry, but it's a national number. And if you apply that number there, you can see, and I've got highlighted, that potential for $930 million of revenue. This is really no change in water, but it's a change in revenue for public entities and water meter operators in the Colorado River Basin states. That's what I call the gross increase in revenue, because basic economics are at work here. You know, once a homeowner, once new meters are installed and a homeowner sees his or her bill go up, he or she will typically cut back on water usage, turn the shower off a couple minutes earlier, and we see a reduction in consumption that good studies have shown are about 5%. So that results in end user savings for the customer and does decrease that potential net increase in revenue for potential users. So next slide, please. So the opportunity, I feel real strongly, the opportunity to save almost $1 billion is too high to relegate to an afterthought. You know, strong energy savings performance contracting market can deliver energy and water savings, and this is a proven mechanism. There's no need to create a new process, and that the water savings, I believe, can be brought up to the same level that electricity and natural gas savings achieve, really through more education, more understanding. But really one of the things that we see most of all is that a robust market for performance contracting for water and energy really benefits from strong state energy office leadership and implementation of best practices. So thank you. I'm going to hand this back to Mary Ann.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And as before with Ed, if you have questions for Rachel, please type them in the dialog box and we'll get to them shortly. Our last presentation is by the Alliance for Water Efficiency. I'll be giving the presentation. And what we want to talk to you about today is financing sustainable water, the name of our new initiative for dealing with water rates and promoting water conservation as part of water rates. The background to this issue is really one that we've been looking at now for quite a while. As we've been working with water suppliers on water efficiency programs and getting them to think about water efficiency as a cost-effective investment, we were learning that all of them were struggling with the good news of declining demand, but the bad news of declining revenues as a result of that declining demand. And the Alliance for Water Efficiency became really interested in this issue because we thought it was tied very clearly and very directly to the future of water efficiency as a topic. Energy efficiency is incentivized in a wide variety of ways, including funding at the federal and state levels, as well as through public benefits goods charges in some states. We don't have that similar kind of funding in water. It comes from the water utilities themselves, and if they are no longer willing to fund programs that reduce their revenue or are perceived as loser investments for them, we have a problem. So we wanted to get involved in this issue, understand it, develop some strategies, talk to experts on it. And one of the first things we did in August of 2012 was assemble 30 water utility and rate experts to discuss these issues of declining water sales, how it affects the overall utility revenue stability phenomenon, and what we can do to make sure conservation and water efficiency programs are shown to be the smart investments that they are and that they're reflected in the rate structures and in the rate base. So the first thing we did was write a summary of the results of that summit. And that document is available on our website. And then we held a second summit in 2014 because we took some of the results from the first summit and we decided to create some tools and some materials to help water utilities deal with this issue. And we wanted those same experts to take a look at them to see whether we had done a good job of answering some of those questions. And what some of those questions were questions about the background of why the water sales are declining, how water utility revenues were falling short of revenue requirements for meeting their fixed costs in debt service and in operating costs for the system. Where were the utilities falling short and why? Was part of this issue a messaging problem with the customer? We were seeing increasingly more and more utilities going out for rate increases with the message that conservation makes rates rise. Thanks for conserving, but oh, guess what? Now we have to actually increase your rates as a result. So what methods are available to repair revenues and improve fiscal stability? What could we come up with in terms of tools and messages to help with that, and what role do industry standards, practices, and policy reforms play in this issue? So the solutions that a lot of these experts were looking at and identifying for us was help in setting rates, making sure that rate makers had the best information available to help them develop rate structures that would promote water efficiency, as Ed was talking about in his presentation earlier, and at the same time guarantee stable revenue. So how do we develop tools to do that? How do we look at the issue of weather and climate? I mean, weather has been an extraordinary factor in the wide variability of sales. Are there market mechanisms that we can look at to deal with that? Insurance options, perhaps. How do we look at industry practices, policies, and standards to help water efficiency and conservation be better financed and better tracked? Were there opportunities that we could pursue that would encourage better financial planning? Were there barriers that were preventing that from happening? What could be done in terms of increasing better exposure to policies, practices, and standards that would help in this area? Messaging is a huge issue that was identified by the participants as being an important one. How should water utilities be engaging with the public? What's working, what's not working? And then how do we drive change, accelerate adoption of better strategies, and influence utility decision makers to adopt rates that are going to be promoting water conservation and still guaranteeing revenue stability? Because the issue is that this is a constant cycle. You know, if a utility starts with identifying the costs of service for providing safe drinking water and legally appropriate and compliant wastewater treatment, those costs then are factored into the water and wastewater rates that are set, and the extent of those rates and how high they are in various configurations will determine the demand response. A consumer will respond to the way the consumer is charged in the bill. Indoor water use is perhaps not as elastic as outdoor water use, but we do see demand response to pricing, which then influences the system design. Do you design a system for what you're projecting demand to be in 30 years without demand responses being configured? I mean, you want to alter your system design to make sure you're not overbuilding and building stranded assets. So if you are modifying your system design in response to declining demand, that also affects what your costs are going to be, which then cycle back into the water rates. It's a cycle that is a constant loop, is constantly needing to be examined. And our traditional approach has been not to look at it as a futuristic examination of that cycle, but our response was traditionally to look at our historic cost recovery and making sure that we historically are collecting our costs. So when we're short in our water cost collection and we have to dip into rate stabilization funds or other reserves, then the utility management goes to the water boards or city councils and asks for increases in rates so that the extent of those kinds of unrecovered costs in the past are now going to be recovered in the future. But the costs in the future may be very different than the costs from the past, and so when system costs change quickly, and perhaps in unexpected ways, looking at historical rates don't necessarily reflect what today's cost consequences are going to be. And the high variability that we're seeing in sales and volatility in those sales patterns are really making it very difficult to plan and to model good rate behavior. So the rates that we're presenting to the customers now don't always give them the best information to make their consumptive decisions, because if it's based on patterns from the past rather than expectations for the future, we're always going to be in arrears. And the importance of this is that the customer needs to recognize that water efficiency and conservation actually helps those rates stay more stable and actually lower, and don't make them increase as is often reported in the press. And we did find a community in Westminster, Colorado who took a close look at this, and so we partnered with them to make sure that their results could be widely published and disseminated. In Westminster, they had the typical problem that most communities have. The citizens were complaining about the continual rate increases, quote, due to conservation, end quote. So the Westminster Water Department management reviewed what their marginal costs for future infrastructure would have been had they not done conservation programs. They've had conservation programs in place since 1980, and if they had not done those programs that reduced the demand, and if they had gone ahead and built all of those future infrastructure, treatment capacity and drinking water storage capacity that they had anticipated, what would their rates have been? And they took a look and came to the conclusion that they've actually saved their residents and businesses 80% in tap fees and 91% in rates compared to what they would have been without conservation. So the rates would have been far higher, tap fees would have been far higher if conservation had not been done. And this is the kind of analysis that we would like to see a lot more done of in various parts, not only in the Colorado River Basin, but all over the country, because it's a good news story about how conservation helps actually stabilize rates rather than the reverse, which is what people think. So we came up with this project called Financing Sustainable Water to deal with all of these issues that I've just mentioned, and we wanted to provide some practical guidance and some new resources for utility managers and employees and elected board members, all of varying technical ability. We wanted not to be, a rate economist technical resource. We wanted to be a resource for the broad range of utility employees and water elected officials that are needing to deal with this issue. So there were three pieces that we basically did in this project. The first was to publish a handbook to explain key rate-setting concepts and to focus on water-efficient rate structures, and to provide case studies and implementation advice on how to get there. We wanted to build a public domain free of charge rate model that would help model the various options for reduced water use, both from droughts and drought pricing and just changes in demand, and look at it in a more futuristic way, look at future probabilities of revenue collection rather than the historical past. We wanted to publish a white paper on this issue of managing weather-related risk, and then launch a website to not only house all of this information, but to provide a forum for the latest research and information from not just us, but from multiple locations and organizations, all on this issue of conservation, revenue, stability, and put it all in one location. So we just released this summer the handbook. It's entitled Building Better Rates in an Uncertain World, and it's available free of charge as a download from the Financing Sustainable Water website. We also, because it's 120 pages, it's sometimes it's a big PDF to look at. We also have printed copies available for $25 each, where you can really look at it in sometimes it's much easier than doing it online, but the online version is free. We also built a sales forecasting and rate model, again built on a user-friendly basis for the non-economist, somebody who needs to understand how their current rate structure could be benefited and improved by additional analysis. And then we built the website, which is financingsustainablewater.org, so it's all in one place, for people to look at. Here's the description of what's in the handbook. There are 6 sections, and they deal with not only an introduction to the issue, but to talk about today's imperative for utility financial management in terms of the stability issue, the role of rate making, building an efficiency-oriented rate structure, what are some financial policies and planning mechanisms for improving the fiscal health of your water agency, and then how you go about implementing it and selling the consumer on the issue. A lot of the technical information, formulas, etc., are in the appendices, but the handbook itself is a very easy to read, very compellingly written document. The rate model is something we're really proud of. It does a lot of things that aren't available in general public domain models like this. It actually gives you the ability to look at your consumption variability and to analyze how weather or drought or any other kind of external shock like the loss of a supply can affect customer consumption. And it also gives you the opportunity to evaluate demand response and price elasticities. And if you change your rates, and you can set up a rate scenario to do that, what happens to your demand and therefore then your revenue. If you're in a drought situation and you need to change pricing to accommodate drought, especially the reduced sales that you might be experiencing because of restrictions, how do you price in that scenario? How do you price to encourage people to use less water in the drought? So these are all questions that can be answered in the model. And look at the probability of collecting your revenue and what's the likelihood of having a deficit with this particular rate structure versus another. What is your probability percentages of collecting that revenue? And then how do you look at it over a 5-year time frame so that you're not just looking at 1 year at a time, but you're looking at blocks of time that enables you to plan better. And then lastly, are your customers able to afford your water service? Is the model showing you that your rate increases in your basic first block are probably going to mean that most of your customers are exceeding the affordability thresholds? So these are the kinds of questions that the rate model can answer. Here's a screenshot of the sales forecasting and rate model. Again, it is available free of charge on the Alliance for Water Efficiency website, Financing Sustainable Water. And here's a picture of one of the screenshots from the model. It's a bill impact screenshot. And so it shows you some of the outputs that the model will give you in terms of your current rates, which are in the red header, versus your proposed rates, which are in the green header. And it shows you in the blue the percent change in both average annual water service costs and median annual water service costs. On the far right-hand side, it gives you an affordability threshold, which shows you the index showing you how the affordability is measured of this particular proposed option. And then it gives you bill impacts. Where are you collecting most of your revenue? Single-family customer class bill histogram on the bottom shows you with your what your percent decreases are in customer bills versus percent increases in customer bills, and how that breaks out over the spread of your single-family customer base. And you can also look at it for each of those categories: single-family, multifamily, commercial, industrial, whatever your customer classes are. The drought rate feature of the model is particularly useful for those states that are experiencing drought. California is, of course, a case in point. It helps evaluate rate performance under the various different drought stages that you have. You can actually set the model to your drought stages, and you can specify up to 4 of them, and then vary the curtailment levels by customer class and play with it and see how it affects your revenue. Because that's the question. You want to figure out what your revenue needs are going to be as part of the design, and not part of a reactionary outcome at the end when you suddenly aren't collecting enough revenue to have met your fixed costs. So this model enables you to do a lot of what-if planning scenarios so that you can design your rates by hand, or use the built-in calculator in the model to find revenue-neutral rates, to goal-seek for a revenue-neutral rate for that particular drought stage. So it's a slick tool. Here's a screenshot that shows how you can specify your curtailment levels by the drought stages. You can also set what your compliance rate is, and we know that 100% of your customers aren't going to comply. Will 80% comply? Will 40% comply? What's the difference if 40% versus 80% comply? And those are the kinds of feedback tidbits of information that the model will give you. And then you can design your drought rates. You can set in your proposed rates what you think the rate should be. You can design that block 1 will never be changed, but only blocks 2 to 5 would be changed. You can make all of those decisions individually and then see how your annual sales revenue and volume change based on those rates, and are you collecting enough? And that is the magic question. Are you collecting enough? As I mentioned, you can decide to leave certain blocks untreated. So this is the screenshot that shows you in the drought rate calculator that you could leave the first lifeline block, the basic service block, leave that completely untouched, and just adjust the other blocks, and the model will be happy to do that. But another thing the model does that's very slick is it does simulations, because it's only in simulating and doing repeated simulations that you see the high variability that's possible. And you can select the forecast year, how many years you'd like it to display, and then it shows you what your sales volume will be, what the summary of the simulations has been, and what you're liable to collect. And you can use this to assess where your revenue risks are and how you might want to adjust it to make sure you're, in all the simulations, you're coming close to collecting it. So that model is available free of charge, again, on the financingsustainablewater.org website. The model and the handbook were both released this past summer. We have, well over 120 or so, and Megan should give us the latest statistics soon, but we have at least 120 downloads of the model that have taken place already. Lots of people are using it, and it's been a tool that's been promoted for free use by anyone who comes to our website and can look at it. We've also published, and I want to just finish up by talking about this, a paper on the financial tools for managing weather risk, looking at insurance as an option for collecting a revenue shortfall in the event of water sales that slump due to a weather factor. Insurance is one option, a market derivative is another. Derivatives have been used for hedging weather risk in energy and agriculture for quite some time, but we've never really used them in water, and this paper examines whether there's a role for that. We'll also be working on communication tools to help water agencies, water providers with communicating with their customers, and so we'll look for those in early 2015. And finally, we're developing a library of case study examples where water conservation reduced and avoided costs, like the Westminster example. And we'd love to have more Colorado River Basin examples to post on the Financing Sustainable Water website. So here's a screenshot of it, financingsustainablewater.org. We encourage you to visit it and take a look. And with that, I want to just conclude my piece of this presentation, and thank you for listening. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jeffrey. We are ready to close the webinar when we want to go to questions that we know have come in so far and that we'd like to answer for you. So if you haven't already typed in questions and you would like to, please type them in and we will answer them. Just to finally close, the PDF of this presentation as well as the recorded webinar will be posted online on the Water Efficiency Action Network website as well as the Alliance for Water Efficiency. So Jeffrey, what questions do we have?
Thanks, Marianne. Yes, we actually have a number of questions for both Ed and Rachel. So beginning with Ed, the first question here is, with the dedicated irrigation customer class, is there a requirement in place that these customers not receive a discount on their sewer rates?
Is there a requirement that irrigation customer classes not receive a discount on their sewer rate? No, that is not part of the matrix, and the matrix evaluation is for assessing the water service charges.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Second question here is, what data supports awarding 3-tier rate structures double the points of seasonal and 2-tier rates?
The assignment of points was I would say it's a negotiation and a judgment. I think it's supported in general by the literature, but the specific numeric values were subject to negotiation and continue to be subject to negotiation within the Urban Conservation Council.
Okay, thank you. The last question I have for you, Ed, is what consumption levels are advised to be used for the proportionality test?
Jeffrey, I'm having a tough time hearing you. Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, yes, of course. What consumption levels are advised to be used for the proportionality test?
The consumption levels are intended to, the test is intended to measure the strength of the price signal basically in the middle of the consumption profile. Most water suppliers, if you graph the compilation of customer bills, you'll have some kind of a bell-shaped curve where there will be some customers that use next to nothing, growing to a peak of some sort, and then trailing off to a small number of customers that use really a heck of a lot. What we were looking for here was to measure the strength of this price signal in the middle of that band. So the instructions for the utilities direct them to identify their average residential customer water use, identify that value, and then take a value that is 3/4 of the average and 1.5 times the average. So basically you're bracketing the average with two levels of consumption, with a level of consumption on either side of it that are proportionally by volume 2 to 1. 1.5 times average being twice the volume of 3/4 of average. And so that's the basis of comparison.
Thank you, Ed. The remainder of the questions are for Rachel and regarding ESPCs. First question there is, regarding ESPCs, is there enabling legislation in all of the Colorado River Basin states?
Yes, all 50 states, including the 7 basin states, have enabling legislation.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. Regarding total potential savings, how is that defined? Over how many years?
That is the entirety of what could be saved, and it could theoretically be done in 1 year. But that's it's unreasonable to assume that 100% of all public entities in the Colorado River Basin states are going to adopt and implement robust performance contracts in 1 year, which is why we wanted to show what a 10% adoption rate would show.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment and a question regarding ESPCs. ESPCs typically focus on indoor conservation, which is typically non-consumptive. How much of the water savings described would decrease the consumptive use of water?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not a water policy expert, so I'm not sure what I understand the consumptive use. But the comment is true that it has typically been focused on indoor conservation, but we're seeing more implementation of ESPC in more of the public works and the infrastructure portions of municipalities and districts and governments.
Okay, thank you. Last question here is, what guarantees do ESPCs provide their customers that cost savings will actually be realized? What if they are smaller than estimated?
So that is part of the performance contract. and that is also part of, it's very clearly defined in the enabling legislation. And in some states, for example, Colorado, the savings must exceed the cost on an annual basis, so every year of the performance contract. In some states, it is more of a over the term of the performance contract, the savings must be greater than the cost. So what I can speak for what McKinstry does, we run very rigorous engineering calculations in order that we feel very confident on the performance and the level of savings that can be achieved, and look to deliver on that. In the case of an ESCO not performing and the savings not being achieved, obviously you'd want to work to fix that, but in some cases the ESCO does actually write a check to the public agency. Obviously, along with that, you want to have measurement and verification services to make sure that the equipment is being used and the facility is being operated as expected. So it's an ongoing process. It's not just our black and white check-in at the end of the year.
Thank you, Rachel. There are no further questions, Marianne.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I want to thank our speakers for this excellent webinar and thank the participants. Look for the posting of both the recording and the PDF of the presentation on both websites, and we look forward to hosting additional webinars for the Water Efficiency Action Network in the future. Thank you all for joining us today.